Ladies and gents, what do you do if you go for a fish and then you come back empty-handed? Well, you hop on the Shroom Life podcast like what I'm doing right now. Welcome to the podcast tonight. I've got a guest. I've got a special guest who's going to be talking about bream fishing in southeast Queensland. Hopefully with these tips, we're going to catch more bream, especially me as well. Today, not so good for me. That's why I'm on this podcast. We got to get some leveling up. Anyway, the guest I'm going to introduce, his name is Grant Redbeardsxadventures Painter. And like I said, he's focusing on bream fishing tonight in this podcast, but he's a very experienced and dedicated angler in that Queensland area. He chases a variety of species from your bream to jacks. That's probably his second most chased species, and also dewies as well on the side. So you're going to find him out there pretty much every day, having a flick, having a go. And I guess he's just like us, a true addict in every sense of the word. And of course, we're going to get into it and feed that addiction. So just like everyone, we chase that adrenaline hit. So let's welcome to the podcast tonight, Grant Painter,
Thanks.
Redbeardsxadventures. How you going, mate?
Good, mate. How are you?
Well, like I told you, I've gone for a fish and it wasn't so good for me today. So that's why the podcast is the next best thing.
That's it. Always learning.
Well, before we get into this podcast, let's just talk about my day. My day basically involved chasing bream, but in Sydney with this much rain, it's been on and off, on and off. It's hard to sort of figure out where the bait are, besides pretty much where the mullet are. That I can find at all times. But it's just been a period where they're either very well fed and they've just turned pretty finicky at this stage. And so that's pretty much my day. How was your day?
Wasn't too bad, mate. I was going to go for a fish, but then remember we have this podcast, so it's probably going to be a very late night fish if I go for one today.
Good man. That's right, ladies and gents. We are lucky to have him tonight. And without further ado, let's continue on with this podcast here. So, first of all, we've talked, quite a bit over the recent history, recent past, but how would you introduce yourself to someone that doesn't know who you are? So what is your fishing background?
I guess it comes down to my granddad on my mum's side. He used to chase sharks in a very small tinny out at sea, and I guess it's flown from him into me, and I've always liked fishing since I was a young kid, and it's just gotten into a bit more of an addiction now that I'm older.
Yeah, now, just to cut you off there, you said on a little tinny chasing sharks.
Yeah, when I say little tinny, I've got a photo somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it looks no bigger than a 3.5, and he's out at ocean chasing sharks. Yeah,
Wow.
mental.
Yeah, not for the faint of heart, as I say.
Not at all.
I mean, I've not had a time when I've been on any sort of watercraft and had a shark come up, but I've seen plenty of videos, Grant. People in kayaks or paddle boards with their legs dangling over the side, and some shark has come up and brushed their leg or their boat, or tried to bite the motor, they say, the electrodes or the metals that send out those electrical impulses. That sort of thing must have played on your mind at some stage.
Yeah, I guess it did. I've been offshore a few times chasing dewies and whatnot like that, and it does play in the back of your head a little bit every now and again that there could be something bigger lurking below. Luckily, I've never seen anything while I've been out, but yeah, it's pretty hairy. I can get it.
Yeah. Well, the first thing you've learnt there is that, you're pretty brave. You're willing to get out on a boat, chase fish, and, sort of feed that addiction. I think a lot of us sort of do understand where that comes from. I think the next question that I really want to ask you is, so how did that translate into your love of bream fishing? Because like this podcast, we're going to talk about bream fishing. We're going to be talking about bream specifically, and you've got a lot of knowledge on that, and at some stage you would have fallen in love with that sport.
Yeah, basically, it came about a while ago now. I used to enjoy just all types of fishing, and then we started hitting one of our local marinas and noticed that obviously in a marina there's always an insane amount of bream in there. So from that point, it went from running like 10 and 12 pound leaders to let's see how silly we can get with it. And I think we went down from 10 and 12 pound leaders and braid down to like 6 and 6 and 4 and 4, and every now and again we'll go and chase brim on the flats using like 2 pound fluoro and 3 pound fluoro and stuff like that.
That's insane. I mean, a lot of people do use the really light, what do they call, silly string
Basically, yeah.
poundages. On the flats, it's really nice. It's very challenging, of course, and you get the bite, don't you? If you step it down, that must have been something that you found out in that period of learning and experimenting.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's been days there where we'll be out and you can literally see fish 5 foot in front of you, but they're not going to eat anything. So we've been using, like, we'll start out using 6 pound, which is what we normally use, but you can see the fish; they're not feeding. So you'll drop down leader to 4 pound, and that 2 pound difference is one of the big differences in what may get you the bite.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about. So we're getting sidetracked, but this obviously is a brim question. So hey, this is what we're here for anyway. 2 pound. How does one use 2 pound? Is it 2 pounds straight through? I mean, three
Yeah.
pound I would use straight through.
So it came down to the start of the comp series last year, and I went into my local, which is Sporties Fishing. It's pretty much the only place that I go to get anything. The guy who owns it, sidetracked here, the guy who owns it, Tony, is one of the best bream fishermen on the coast. And that's one person who I've learnt a lot through. So basically, I went in and seen Tony, and I'm like, I need to put line on this reel for straight through. And basically, when I'm using straight through, it's mainly your hard bodies, like your chubbies and that kind of thing. And I'm like, I need to get some straight through fluoro to put on it. And I was happy to go 4, maybe 3. And he goes, basically, you turn around and he goes, all I've got is 2. And I had a comp that weekend, and I was like, well, looks like I'm using 2 pound. And it cost me a little bit of money. I think I lost about 7 or 8 little swim.
Little hard bodies,
Yes,
divers.
yeah, little hard bodies, basically little jackal chubbies and whatnot like that. I lost 4 of them, and I lost 4 of them in one pontoon basically, and then the last one that I threw in there pulled it out, and it was a 30 centimeter jack, and I was like, okay, that makes sense as to why I've been losing all my lures.
Yeah, we don't have that problem down here in Sydney of getting sniped by these, what do you call them, red dogs. These
Basically, yeah,
big,
jacks, reds, pretty
yeah.
much. Yeah, they're very ferocious little bar. Yeah,
And I can imagine you don't really have a chance in structure on such light lines. I mean, Jack with Chubbies are what, 20 odd bucks a pop. They're
yeah, you're
fantastic
looking at about
lures.
like 25, 26 bucks a pop basically, and when you're throwing them around pontoons and one of them gets taken on by a jack when you're running 2 to 4 pound line, you don't have much chance at all.
A curious question here. What color do you like in the Jack with Chubby?
That day, it all depends on the watercolor. To be completely honest, darker colors, darker water; lighter colors, lighter water is essentially the way I go. Uh,
Do you
that day
like the,
that that day that I lost 4, they were all the black ones,
right.
and the AU, I'm pretty sure it's called.
What about the rattle? They have two versions, don't they? One has a rattle and one is silent.
From memory, the ones that I was using that day were silent. So yeah.
Interesting. All right, we're going to obviously delve deeper into this as the podcast goes on. Just a few bunch of fun, easy questions, get to know the guest sort of stuff. So let's talk about your latest trip. Like your latest trip, maybe outside of your general locality.
Um,
Where'd you go and what were you chasing?
I think the last. Do you mean fishing session or like actual like holiday to fish?
Like I say, a holiday.
I think the last time would have been around this time last year. I went to Airlie Beach for a week. It
Right.
wasn't. It was fun. Basically, it was all land based. We had a couple of hiccups before we left, so it left us carless, which wasn't too fun. But
Oh, no.
yeah, it was fairly frustrating. It was definitely a trip to remember with getting flights cancelled and whatnot. But other than that, it was a good fun trip. We managed to get a few fish on the board and basically fished places you probably shouldn't. But you got to try and get the fish somehow, don't you?
That's right. Any memorable catches from that trip?
Uh, Dropping a tiny little savage gear prawn on top of a cod and it inhaling it and nearly bricking me was probably one of the funniest things.
Yeah, I guess when they hit unexpectedly, that amount of joy.
Oh, it was good fun, I'll tell you that much.
Do you recommend? Would you go back to Early Beach?
I'm actually in the works of going back up there in November this year. So
Right,
yes.
fantastic. Any target in particular, or
Uh,
any goals or boxes that you want to tick off whilst
well,
you're back up there the second time?
this time we're actually driving up and taking a boat. So the plan is to hit some shallow reefs, try and get a few reef species, and go up the creeks and chase Jackson Barrel, basically.
If you had a choice of another destination, so you sort of already have decided that you're going to go back up there, is there any other place, any other part of Australia that you would like to give a go, visit one day?
As funny as this may sound, I want to come down to Sydney and bang some kingies so badly. So
Right.
I think that's on one of the lists for to do fairly soonish kind of thing.
Yeah, the kingfish scene in Sydney is improving. Yeah, I never really saw it as one of those big attractions, but I think I've had a few people now tell me that they wouldn't mind fishing in particular Sydney Harbour.
Yeah, I think it's more the fact that like you obviously get the views of the harbour and whatnot like that, but I think it's more the fact that you don't really get kingfish like you do up here as you do down there kind of thing. So it'd be nice to go down there and target them, get a couple under the belt, and then just try and see how big of a fish we can get on how light of a setup we can use kind of thing.
Oh wow, you're gonna find. Have you caught one before?
No, that's another reason why I'd like to come down.
Yeah, I think it would be definitely an eye-opening experience. I always forget how powerful they are. Every time I go through a period having not caught them for a couple of months or maybe several months, and you hook onto a little one. We call them rats, rat
Yep,
kingfish.
yep.
You just you can't believe how hard they can pull sometimes. It's just you bring it up and it's like, oh, it's only that big. How it felt like I was pulling up something bigger, like a submarine.
It's funny you say that. You kind of have the same thing with like jacks. We were fishing just before Christmas. Went out in my mate's boat, and I seen like a little bait flicker on the surface, and I threw a jackal over there, ran it back through, and got hit by this jack. Gave a really good fight, and I bring it up, and it would be no bigger than 25 centimeters. And these
Right.
things, yeah, these things are very dirty, which is why it makes them so fun.
Yes, I can imagine. I haven't caught a jack yet. I mean, I've had some chances when I went up to far north Queensland in that mining town Weipa.
Yep, I
You
know
know,
we got.
spent about 10 days there. Caught a bunch of new variety of different varieties of fish and ticked off all these things off the bucket list, so to speak, which is obviously going to be my next question. But yeah, just the mangrove jacket just eluded me, and I'm still sort of in the back of my mind thinking, how's that fight? Everyone talks about it one day.
Well, let me put it this way. I've got a friend who lives maybe 25 minutes south of me, and he's been chasing jacks, and he's using 20-pound leader, and he's been smoked multiple times in the last week and a half or so. And I've said to him a couple of times, "You need to get 40-pound. You need to get 40-pound." So I run minimum like 30-pound braid, 30-pound leader, sometimes 40. And yeah, they will. They're very dirty fish. They know exactly where they need to go home, and they'll do anything they can to get there.
Yeah, that's sort of just it's a sobering thought thinking that you need 40 and up sometimes. It's just
I
for a
I've got a couple of friends on the coast that run like 60 and 80-pound, and they're getting smoked by jacks on 80-pound.
that's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty hectic.
Now, I've just mentioned a little bit about some bucket list fish. Anything that is on your particular list that you would like to tick off besides the yellowtail kingfish?
Well, obviously, yeah, the kingfish. When we go up to Early Beach, I want to get a couple of cold trout, that kind of thing. Barramundi, I haven't chased barramundi. Like, there's barramundi on the Gold Coast, but I haven't gone out to chase them on the Gold Coast. So that's another thing that I'll try and get in early. But if money wasn't an issue, there's two fish that I would love to go chase.
Yep.
I'd like to go to PNG and chase black bass because
Right, yep.
that just looks insane. And I'd love to go to Oman and chase brim because have you seen the size of the brim that are over there? They're like
Yes,
60 and 70
they
centimeter brim, and that'd just be one insane fish to catch.
a small Omani brim is literally max sized brim in Australia. Like from
Yeah,
what I've seen.
from what I've seen as well, yeah, it's insane, and that'd be like it'd be so much fun.
What do you think they look like? Do you think they look more like a silver or a black brim? They've got this weird sort of dark.
It's like a hybrid, really. Like it's really hard. Like I've seen some that are like really, really, really dark, and then I've seen some that are like crystal clear, like almost like see-through silver type of thing. So I
Yep,
guess I'm not. I don't know much about. I don't know anything about chasing them over there. But I guess it all depends on where they are and whatnot like that.
understandable. Now, let's move on and talk about brim fishing. Like on this podcast, I love stories, especially. So if you got a story about anything, about any capture or experience, that's what the viewers love here. But I'd like to ask you, you've probably caught about a zillion brim. I mean, we
Yeah,
all
probably
have.
close to it. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, there's probably about a dozen like very memorable captures. Is there like a really interesting one that you'd like to share, or like a funny one, or like maybe your biggest one, your most impressive one?
I think one of the best days I've had brim fishing. I went out with the boys from Sporties, Tony and one of the other fellas there, and we went out solely to film a video because obviously I do videos as well. Went out solely to film a video for the Sporties YouTube channel on chasing brim in dirty water with like jackal chubbies and like the pro lure crankbaits and that like kind of. So it's basically called cranking for brim in dirty water.
Yeah.
We were on the water for, from memory, 3.5 hours. Now, I went back through the footage because we were curious as to how many fish we caught. I went back through the footage, and in that 3.5 hours, using just crankbaits, no scent, nothing like that, and it was basically at 3 and 4 pound straight through fluoro, we caught over 100 fish.
Wow.
And I think there would have been maybe, I reckon it would have been less than a fifth of those fish were undersized.
Yeah.
So that was an insane fishing day. And to be like, I only fished for maybe like the last hour, if that, because I was filming all the day. And I still caught nearly 30 fish to myself. So that one day there was probably one of the best days that I've ever had out solely chasing brim.
That's insane. First of all, the amount of numbers, that's incredible. And most of
Oh,
them being over, the legal limit as well means that every hookup was a good fight to some extent.
oh, definitely, definitely. And it's not like we weren't just chasing them on. It was all in like the canals up here. We weren't chasing them just on pontoons and that, but it was pretty much everywhere. Like there was three of us in the boat, two up the front, I was up the back, and it was basically just cast, wine, fish, 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 and it's just, yeah. Excuse me.
That's
It was
incredible, Grant.
it was an insane day. It was very very fun.
Like obviously this is probably the wrong phrase, like open water in a canal, but literally you're just casting 360 around the boat with three blokes and yep, I'm on, or yep, I'm on, and it didn't
Essentially, yeah,
matter if it was
you're casting over like sandbanks and like rocky banks and stuff like that. So you're casting obviously towards the shore, not just out in the open water type of thing. So you're always
right.
casting it like a little bit of structure, but not structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That certainly makes sense. I was just imagining it was just one of those days where you just couldn't put a foot wrong, like if you dropped a lure in.
I mean, essentially, yeah. Like we just, so the guys that I was with obviously know where the fish are, and it was one of those days where the fish were just on, and it's like I think you could have thrown a silly string into the water with nothing on it, and I reckon they would have eaten it. It was just one of those days where it was a very very good day.
Do you like fishing canals? Is that a sort
Yeah,
of structure type that you prefer to fish in and you visit often?
yeah. Canals is probably the canals and bridges for myself is probably the main things that we chase. Obviously, if I have a boat, it's canals and pontoons and stuff like that. But when I'm land based, it's 90% of the time it's bridges.
Look, I think it's time to sort of start hitting the meaty sections of the podcast. Like I said, Grant, it's your podcast. You can take it whichever direction that you'd like to take it in. But, here's a question that we could get started on, and that's, is there something about brim in particular that you have understood and learnt and discovered about them over the years that other people, other anglers, they may not know?
Um, Once again, I have to right back to Tony at Sporties because most of the stuff that I know is through him. Going out fishing with him, just talking to him in store and whatnot like that. He's honestly one of the brim gods of the Gold Coast, and he's awesome. Basically, one thing I've worked out is they're very like obviously they're very finicky. They'll eat bait no matter what. That's fine, but um, once you scare them, they will always come back for another look. So
Yep.
it's like I throw a lot of top water. We love throwing top water for brim because it's just so much fun. And throwing your top water in there for brim, as soon as your lure hits the water, like you can cast on top of them. Lure hits the water, they'll scatter, but 3 or 4 seconds later they come back over and be like, "Ooh, what's that?" kind of thing. So it's like they when they're skittish, but some 90% of the time they're going to come back and they're very inquisitive fish. So yeah, very inquisitive.
Yeah, that's the word that I was thinking of as you were explaining it, explaining that they're. I guess they're a little bit like kingfish as well. I guess it's not probably not right to sort of compare the two, but they'll have a look. I mean, they move quickly, they get scared, but then they'll come back and then they'll sort of approach it in their own time and own sort of demeanor.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's the same as Brim. Like I've seen, like we've been doing comps and whatnot like that, and we'll see Brim sitting on the edge of a pontoon feeding, and we'll skip a plastic up next to the pontoon. It'll hit the pontoon, and basically every time we're in the boat fishing like that, and you hit the pontoon, it'll make like a knock sound, and it's basically you'll hear the other person on the boat saying knock knock, and then lure falls down and whack. 90% of the time, they're going to come back and eat it. So it's essentially when you're casting up pontoons, hitting the pontoon is like knocking on the door to see if anyone's home.
Yeah, that's great. Let's talk about some of your favorite ways to basically fish for brim on the Gold Coast. So, like, I've never been up that way, so I don't sort of understand the terrain. How would you describe it? So I know that so far from what you've explained to me, there's canal systems, which are, you've got flats and pontoons, and it's probably residential by the sounds of things. We don't really have that in Sydney, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
yep. So basically, the main spots that myself and my teammate fish are canals. So you've got like sandbanks and like rocky banks, rocky walls, like retaining rock wall. There's pontoons, and it's 90% of the places that we're fishing are like residential, like backyards and stuff like that. There's a lot of ways to chase them up here. Like you've got a lot of guys that'll go out into the flats and throw either top water or like shallow diving cranks. You've got guys that'll fish bridge pylons with cranker crabs, which is what we do as well. You've also got your tiny little blades that people drop blades in deep water and stuff like that. But realistically, it all depends on the season as to where we're going to fish. And yeah, so yeah, depends on the season. So early season, like right about now, I'm going up into the canals and I'm throwing top water and little poppers and bent minnows and stuff like that for them. Whereas when it comes to if it's rained for like the last 2 weeks and the water's dirty, I'll go up
yep.
into the canals once again, throw 3 pound fluoro straight through with crankbaits and little things like that on them. And then when it comes to, I actually don't throw a lot of plastics. I do throw plastics, but it's not my first go to.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's funny. Like you watch a lot of the old school videos with like Starlo and Rex Hunt and stuff like that, and their first go to is like your wrigglers and stuff like that. And these days, there's that many different lures that you can chase brim on. It's the wrigglers are one of the last, not last, but it's never your first pick to throw for brim anymore.
I understand. Yeah, I guess it's different depending on where you're fishing and how you're targeting them. I'd say 90% of anglers in Sydney, especially if they're land based, are throwing a plastic at this stage. Yeah, I guess the hard body bite can be there. Some years it's fantastic. You'd pick up, double digits over a quick bit, but other than that, I think these days, obviously Sydney, maybe I don't know if it's the rain or if there's just a lot more fishing pressure. Like people were throwing lures that they're starting to sort of want that pause and that presentation to not be moving in a lot of cases. I guess on a boat it's different as well.
Well, that's it. Like it all depends on how you're fishing as well. Like if I'm going chasing a brim, not in the boat, in the boat, then I will throw like crankbaits and stuff like that. But 90% of the time, if I'm land based, I'm not throwing crankbaits. It is so much easier to work a crankbait from a boat back to yourself, as like working with the banks and the sand and whatnot like that, than trying to throw them from the land. Like if I'm throwing from the land, it's like plastics, yes, and like your top water and stuff like that, more or less.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you actually touched on the question that I was going to ask you, which was about the next several months. You know, like we're in the tail end of summer now, and obviously you've mentioned that surface presentations right now is the go-to. I mean,
Yeah,
in Sydney as well, some years surface is very good at any time of day, pretty much. Even in the middle of the day, I've
yeah.
had good success. Even at night, I mean, they just some years they just don't care. They'll be less. I guess they're just not as wised up to the surface presentation as they are for the other lure types. And you know, if it's on, that's the best, literally the best way to get them. You get the most pleasure,
Oh,
and it's
definitely.
extremely effective. And the bigger brim go for it too.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So basically, what are we? We're in January now. So our first comp's next month. So the next, say, 2 to 3 months, we're going to be chasing them mainly on top water. We'll chase them on top water. When it's summer, they normally sit higher in the water column. They're not sitting down in the cooler water and whatnot. They like to sit up the top, from what we've worked out anyway. So the next couple of weeks, like next couple of months, kind of thing, I'm going to be throwing a lot of top water. You'll throw your brim prawns as well, like that, against pontoons and whatnot like that. Um, but yeah, basically top water or even plastics, but like super lightweighted plastics, like 140th and 150th type of thing. So it's like real slow flutter type of kind of presentation. But yeah, like personally myself, it's going to be mainly top water and pretty much top water only.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about this top water business right now. This is probably a good area to sort of talk about. So, what sorts of maybe specific lures, just to help the listener to sort of gauge?
So basically, I think there's three go to lures basically when it comes to top water for room for me. Unfortunately, the two of them are not cheap lures,
Right?
and there's a lot of knockoffs out there of them, but they just don't cut it with the normal ones. Like my main one is a bent minnow, the OSP bent
Yeah,
minnow, the 76. I'm pretty sure it is the 76 bent minnow is by far the best top water lure for brim. You
yeah,
don't have to change a thing about it. As soon as it comes out of the box, it's good to go. If you it's one thing with those with the bent minnows. If you change the hooks on them because you don't think they're going to hold up or anything like that, it's going to change the action on the lure 100%. Like the lure has its own action that it does itself, but it's just the presence and what it does and the way it sits is just top notch. Like it's top tier. Apart from that, you've got your like any type of little tiny little 2 centimeter popper. They're fantastic as well. They'll cast a mile, and that's one thing I like about the bent minnows. They cast an
yeah.
extremely long way. And I've lost the train of thought of the last
That's all
one that
right.
I
I
had.
want to cut you off anyway.
Yep,
So, about the OSP bent minnow, OSP, all their lures are premiumly priced, but they just work, and you
that's
don't want
exactly it.
to. They put, I mean, just like a lot of other companies as well, not just saying they're the only company, but OSP definitely do their research because you know everything that they present in that lure as it comes out of the box, they must have tested to the nth degree.
Oh,
And so
most
you
definitely.
shouldn't change the weight of the hooks, you shouldn't change the split rings, you really shouldn't. And
No,
when you said
definitely not.
expensive lures, I thought $30 plus. What's $30 plus? It's the $33, $36 OSP bent 76.
Exactly. There, you're looking at like $35 to $38, depending on where you go for them. But it
What?
comes down to they work, and that's why you buy them.
Yeah, just a little bit about the bent shape. Why do you think they work so well? Like the bent style in particular. Like OSPs, obviously they're the original, they're the best. Why is a bent style effective? Like to say to me and you, we understand we've used them, but I know a lot of viewers would think, "Oh, you know, what is that? It's not even straight. It's a banana bender,
Well,
sort of."
actually, that's it just there.
Yeah, there you go. So Grant,
So,
that's you can see right there that
That
It doesn't
yeah,
have a long axis which is
not at all.
symmetrical at any place along the lure. It looks like it's come out of the packet or come out of the factory defective to some anglers.
Well,
So
yeah, exactly. I think personally myself, the way I work them, it makes it look like a skipping baitfish or like a scared prawn type of thing, or like a hurt a hurt baitfish essentially. So basically, with the bent minnows, the way I work them personally, throw them out, let them sit on the water, and basically I'm usually when I'm using a bent minnow, I'm sight casting. So
right,
I'm looking for brim. If I see the brim, like a pack of brim, I'll cast it on top, like
yep,
land smack bang on top of them. Normally they'll scare for like a couple of seconds, but this is when it comes to they're very inquisitive. They 90% of the time they will come back and have a look, and as soon as you see them start to come back and look, it's like a really aggressive twitch, and then just let it pause again. And 90% of the time on that pause is when they're going to smash it.
yeah,
And
that's a great point there because
when
that
they hit it,
goes.
it's just another level of excitement. They're just yeah, it's fun watching them follow and smash it.
How do you explain that crack? Like I know you've just put that imagery in my head. If you anyone that's ever used Surface, it's like a swap or it's I don't know what it is. It's like a really watery thud.
The easiest way I can explain it is if you've got like a size 2 sinker and you throw it in the water, that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, it's
It's like a little
unmistakable.
bullet type of thing. It's really cool to watch as well.
And then when that rod just loads up with the in synchrony with the sound,
Oh,
oh,
it's
that's
the best. The
yeah,
best. Hearing your drag peel after
yeah.
this thing's hit you on the surface, nothing better.
Because I don't strike. I mean, I don't generally. No one should. I don't think many people strike when
No,
it comes to surface lures. You basically just you work it, and you don't keep too much slack in the line. And when that pressure comes on, that hit and it loads, you keep that load on and you bring it in.
basically, yeah. There's been a couple of times there where I've cast out, worked it, and then I've had someone in the boat with me, or I've been in with someone else's boat, and they've said something to me, and I'm looking at them, and then I've just gone to wind to kind of like work it again, and there's
Yeah,
literally a fish that's plucked it off the surface, taken it underneath, and I haven't even known, and he's just sitting on the bottom of the water with it in his mouth, ready for me to pull him in. I've had it a couple of times,
yeah,
and it's super interesting because you don't really know he's there.
yeah. Sometimes instead of like smashing it, they'll have a like a sip at it.
Yeah,
Like
it's
they
more
just
like a
go,
slurp than anything.
yeah, and then it's just like you may not know that you're on, but once you put a little bit of winding and then the fish realizes it's connected to something, it just goes for that run.
That is exactly
That's
it. Yeah.
great. Now that's here's another question. I get asked this all the time when it comes to surface lures. Stingers. What's your opinion about retrofitting stingers? Now we already know OSP. Maybe it's not necessary.
Well, I have a couple of different. Obviously, the other lure that I mainly use is called a dilemma popper.
Yep.
Now, the back of the dilemma popper comes with what I've known to call as a tinsel treble. So the treble has essentially tinsel hanging off the back of it, so as like a teaser type of thing. So um, when with the dilemma poppers, when their hooks have gone on me, I sometimes put a stinger on the back of that, or like your I can't think of what they're called.
Like a new treble. Oh, stinger. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
a feather.
yeah, like a feather, or I'll even use like the hooks that come on ZX40s, the little
Yes. Yes.
dual assists.
Yep.
I've got a couple of these, and some of them I've got all the hooks on, like so. But then sometimes I'll change this hook here to a like assist hooks.
Yep.
Now, mainly because of the way that the brim slurp, sometimes they don't inhale the treble as much as they should. With the assists in the middle there, because 90% of the fish that you catch on, or I've caught on bent minnows, they normally eat the middle treble, not the rear.
Right.
Um, yeah, which is I found really interesting. So I've on some of my bent minnows, I'll change the middle hooks. I'll take the treble off and put assists in the middle hook. Now, mainly because when they do come up and they slurp that in, they don't really know that they're slurping in a treble, and they're slurping in small assists, and your hook up rate does increase that little bit, but you do lose a little bit of different action on the lure itself.
Yep. So to me, in my mind, I think that yeah, you increase that hookup rate, but sometimes the mere thought of surface fishing is to get that surface smash. So I sort of like stray away from retrofitting like sting hooks that will sit lower, for that fact. So
Yeah,
there's less likely a chance for an explosion, which is, sort of what I want. I want to see a big surface explosion. I want to see my mate go, what the,
yeah,
look on his shoulder, and then my reels just going
yeah.
like
No,
that.
I definitely
That's
agree with you. When it comes to that kind of thing, like that's where dilemma poppers are great fun. Like dilemma poppers are probably only like I think they're 55 or 60 mil long.
yep,
They have a massive ball in the inside of them. So you're basically using them. They're called a dilemma popper, but you're basically more or less walking them like a walk a dog action. And when you're walking with that walk the dog action, all you hear is that the ball on the
the
inside
little
bouncing
ball.
around. And some of the best hits that I've had with top water on Bream are with the dilemma popper. But my first pick for top water is still your bent minnow.
Is it just a short stab after sitting? Is that your most preferred action for the OSP?
Essentially, yeah, it's mainly like a cast out, let it kind of slap the water. So you're trying to get a nice high cast, slap the water, then work it for maybe like 3-4 seconds, and then pause for about the same, and then basically repeat that half of the way in. And once you're half the way in, unless you've had something slurp at it or you can visually see something following, then recast and start all over again, kind of thing.
What are some of your favorite colors when it comes to that lure?
So I don't really know the names, but this one here, I don't know if
That's
you
all
can
right.
see
So
it.
we may not know the exact name, but
You
color
can.
wise, it looks like it's mostly white with a
It's
green
actually
head, would you say?
it's actually more of a clear. So it's like a clear in the middle, and one side's like a greeny olive, and then the bottom's got like a tinge of orange on it.
Right.
But that one there, and then the other one, the main one that I mainly throw is your white, the plain white. Obviously,
Yep.
on the Gold Coast, you get a lot of people that go at the back and throw their bread in the water. A bent minnow, white bent minnow looks exactly like a piece of crust or like a piece of bread that's been thrown in the water. So,
That's interesting.
yeah,
I had a guest talking about Brim as well from Adelaide, and he said that he liked using white soft plastics because it looked like bird crap
yeah,
falling
yeah.
from the snags when they sit on it, and
We've
you
had we've
just
had one day when we've been in a competition and we were fishing this bridge, and just past the bridge on the left hand side the bank there was a lot of trees and like overhanging trees, and it was hard to get a plastic underneath, but if you could, we were throwing salt and pepper. The color is of the brim prawns, the aqua prawns.
yep,
And we were basically throwing them on like an unweighted hook and skipping them under because you had ibises in the top of the trees shitting basically into the water, and you
yep,
had these brim coming up and eating the poo off the top. So
yeah,
we're skipping brim prawns up underneath the water and hooking up to like these good sized fish, and
yeah.
basically we sat there for about an hour and got our whole bag of 30 pluses out of this one little tree, which
It
was
just boggles
insane.
the mind why something like excrement they feed on it. Just
I don't think it's so personally myself. I don't think it's like the actual fact that that's what it is. I think it comes back to when I was talking about the bent minnow slapping the water. I think
yeah,
it's more they're inquisitive as to say, oh, what's that? Just hit the water. So, yeah,
and they'll have a taste and then realize,
yeah.
that's
Basically, I've seen multiple ones come up, hit it, and then spit it back out like 2 seconds later, kind of thing.
sort of like they take a bite first, then well, not take a bite, but you know what I mean. They have a go first, and then they ask questions later. Like in this
Well,
animal kingdom, you gotta feed, you gotta hunt, and you've gotta support yourself. So
yeah, they're honestly they're little savages, and they're willing to pretty much eat anything that's put in front of them, as long as they're hungry. Basically.
is there any other lure besides the dilemma popper and the OSP? Is there like a third one that you wanted to mention?
So I have these are probably one of the big ones on the coast. Obviously, everyone should know these, the cranker crabs.
Yep,
They're massive on the coast. So you're basically throwing them mainly against bridge pylons and like rock bars, like anywhere you'd think a crab would be. Them centered up along rock bars and what is it, rock bars and like pontoons as well against retaining rock walls and bridges and stuff like that. Anywhere you can see an oyster essentially is where
yep,
you're throwing a cranker crab. We always use the heavies in the smaller version. It just seems to work, and
yep.
yeah, they're probably them. And it's funny, you go from throwing like 4 pound, 6 pound on bent minnows to with cranker crabs, I'm throwing 10 and 12 pound with a 2 to 4 kilo setup because of basically the structure you're in, and you basically just want to, as soon as you've hooked up, you want to rip them out of there. Otherwise, they're gonna get you around that pylon and whatnot like that. And I'm not keen on losing $25 crabs.
Yeah, I understand. I use 10 or 14 pound on some of these lures, like the mussel, the
Yep.
crab, anything that sits on the bottom. I'd rather have another go rather than, I'd rather maybe lower my chance of a bite, but still being with the shot because I know the areas that I fish, the snags have arms. These snags would just come up and just grab your lure and just yank it away from you, and it doesn't matter what you do.
Uh,
So,
I've lost.
yeah.
I've had days where the cranky crab bite is on, and I've lost multiple cranky crabs in one day, and it's been an expensive day, but it comes down to if that's what's going to work, then so be it, kind of thing.
How do you work these lures? Do you jiggle them on the spot or
With the cranky
draw
crabs,
them to yourself?
most of the time where we're fishing them is like heavy current, so it's
Yep.
more throwing them up current and letting them flow back with the current. It's not so much moving them myself; it's letting the current do the work for me, kind of thing.
So it's more like a cast, wait for a hit, and if you don't get one, maybe jiggle it once and bring it back in and
Es-
recast
Essentially, yeah,
approach.
because I've noticed that they will sit on. Like I've thrown a cranker crab out once during a comp, and I've let it sit on the bottom there next to a pylon for a good minute and a half, 2 minutes type of thing, and then have had a big fish come along, inquisitive again, have a go at it, and then take off. And that's another thing that I've worked out with the crabs. It's like if you're throwing the crab and it's sitting on the bottom and you feel like a hit, 90% of the time, that hit isn't actually a hit. The fish has already eaten it, and that hit is it trying to shake the trebles out of its mouth.
Right. Interesting take there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I worked out, and not only from my knowledge, but from other people's knowledge as well. But you've worked out that that's not always the hit. Like sometimes, yes, it is the hit, but depending on where you are, sometimes that there is them actually, they've already slurped it up off the bottom because you've got that little bit of slack and you may not know it, but that's them kind of trying to shake the lure out of its mouth type of thing.
That does make sense. I've always thought that when I use the crab specifically, it can be hard to tell whether you've got a fish on. If you're sight casting, yeah, you could tell.
Oh, yeah,
But
definitely.
half the time when you're dropping it down, either the line starts dropping, but if it's near the bottom, you can't tell whether the bottom was the bottom of where you hit where the lure is, or if it's the bottom of the jaw of a brim's mouth.
Well, that's it. Yeah, and there's been times there where we've thrown them out, and you're like, don't know what's going on. Like, okay, I'll wind in, and you'll go to wind in, and it's like, oh, there's actually a fish on there. You didn't actually feel the hit, so
Yeah,
it
it
kind of
sort
makes
of loads
sense.
up, and then
Yeah,
you feel a thud, thump, 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 thump.
that's
Yeah,
exactly it. Yeah.
like it doesn't. It's like it doesn't even know that it was caught up until you started to try to
Well, that's
winch
it.
it
Like
back up.
until you've loaded up on that line, he has no idea that you're there. Basically,
Any specific colors? So you like the heavy version, and I think that one looked like an olive green.
olive, yes, olive, and it's mainly your olive. I don't mind the olive. Actually, no, that's the brown. Sorry, that's the brown. That one, but the
Yep.
brown, the olive, and the other, it's like a black with like the orange claws. That as well. But it's mainly your browns and your olives up here that are probably your best off.
Yeah. Do you use the sand one at all, or do you use any of the lighter colors? What have they got? They've got vampire, they've got sand, they've got
Yeah, there's the vampire sand. There's the green, the olive, the brown. There's another one that's it's like a purpley, like a sand with like a
yeah.
purple on
There's
the
one
back of it
that's
as
actually
well.
called purple,
Well, there you
like
go.
purple. So
But no, mainly for myself, it's the browns and the olives. I do have a couple of the sand. I
yep.
don't throw them as much, but once again, it all becomes down to your setting. Like if I'm on pontoons with sand underneath them or sand banks kind of thing, I'll throw the sand ones. But most of the time, it's bridges and pylons and stuff like that where you're going to find like black and olive and green, excuse me, crabs there more than anything else.
What about hard bodies? Well, you mentioned a little bit about the jackal chubby. Are there any other hard bodies, or maybe that's the one that you use most often?
To be honest, jackal chubbies, they're probably one of the most ones I use, yes, but as of late, the new in feet range, the 44s by Daiwa, are one of the main ones that I'm using. I can't remember, the Kodachis, they're one of my favorites.
Yep.
Just their action, their castability, they cast an absolute mile. If need be, I can put new different hooks on them. With all of my cranks, I change all the hooks to a certain hook that I like. I don't actually have them handy, but yeah, like a Gamakatsu size 12. I'm pretty sure it is a wide gap. Basically, run them on all my lures. They're probably one
Yep.
of the best hooks around for Brim. Like Brim only, yes. Don't use them for anything else. But you got your Pro Lure as well. Your Pro Lure cranks, they're very good. They're probably one of your most affordable ones as well. I think they're only about 12, $13 for what they are. And obviously, it's hard to go past the Atomic Brim Crank 38s. I'm pretty sure they are. That in a Ghost Gill is probably my favorite one out of everything else.
That is my favorite. That one
Yeah,
there, the Ghost Gill Brown in the deep, regular deep
yeah.
atomic. It's just a
The Ghost Gill in the Deep is probably my favorite. That's what I was throwing the day that I got my Jack on 2 pound on, because I didn't have anything else left. It was literally my last chubby in the box, and threw it up against a rock wall and a pontoon,
risk
and
it for the biscuit, as they say.
that's pretty much it. Yeah, if I lost that, I was going back to plastics for the day, but it ended up working out, and yeah, we did well.
Do you like the deep divers, or do you sort of have all three versions? I guess like shallow, medium, and deep, and you sort of
I never
match.
I never really throw the shallows. It's either mediums or deeps. I'd rather my lure to be bouncing off the bottom, making like a muck in the sand, than sitting on the surface kind of thing. If I'm throwing
Yep.
surface, I'm obviously going to throw like bent minnows and stuff like that. So for personally myself, I never throw the shallow divers.
Yep. The reason I ask is because it might seem like an obvious question as, yeah, of course, if you want to fish shallow water, use shallow. If you want to fish deeper, use deeper. But the action changes ever so slightly and the wobble,
Yeah,
if
that's
that
it.
makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
no, it's very true. I find that the top water ones, for when I've used them, the shallow divers don't have a much of an action compared to the mediums and the deeps. I mean, it could be different for everyone, but personally, that's what I found. Which is why I'd rather throw the mediums or the deep divers over the shallows.
yep. Like the shallow specifically, some brands make it so that it is almost like a wake bait. Like it'll
Yeah,
only be a centimeter.
I have noticed that, and that's another reason why I'm not too fan of like. Yeah, I'd rather throw like a bent minnow or what like that than try and use a wake bait essentially.
Yeah, wake bait's actually quite good. I mean, maybe not for brim, but for bass, it's not
Oh,
bad. But for brim,
I
like you
agree with
said,
you there.
like you said, there's something about banging that hard body on the bottom.
Yeah, no,
Like it just yeah,
it's that little bit of commotion, and once again, like it comes back to the whole thing that brim are very inquisitive fish, and you make a little commotion near them, they're going to be want to know what is that like kind of thing and want to come over to it.
yeah, that's fantastic. Now, what about let's move on away from lures and talk about conditions and, things that may matter or may not matter. You know, time of day, tide, rainfall, barometer, wind, cloud cover, moon phase. How do you feel about those particular, I guess, options of your fishing section and what may matter to you and what may not matter?
Personally, myself, I'm still yet to work out perfectly the moon phases and whatnot like that. But tides, I'd rather fish a high tide, like a decent sized high tide, than a run out tide. Like basically, like I like fishing the top of the run in to the start of the turn.
Yep,
Um, and when it comes down to conditions, I honestly can say this last year's tournament season that we fished in every kind of season you could have, like every kind of condition. Like we fished sunny, like stupid hot days. We fished in the rain. We fished in days where it's that windy. We have to get in like 2 meters away from a pontoon or the bank to cast because it's so
yep,
windy and whatnot like that. I fished deep water. I fished shallow water. I fished just before a storm hit, fishing after the floods that we had last year as well. It makes it very interesting. And when it comes to conditions, you're basically changing your lures to um, changing your lures to suit the conditions that you're about to fish in. Is realistically how it comes down to.
Yeah, I guess the one thing you mentioned there about the moon phase being something that's hard to determine whether it matters or it doesn't. I think it just depends on the angler. Some anglers deeply like believe that this particular face of the moon that's shown in the sky and when it rises and when it sets makes all the difference. And there are those that they're undecided. They're open to the idea if they ever find a pattern that sort of their experiences back up, if that makes sense.
Oh, I completely agree that the moon phase does have something to do with how they're biting and whatnot like that. Like I found that full moons, generally like the day before, day of, and day after of a full moon, that I don't get obviously as many fish. Which
Yep.
obviously there is one. Okay, so there's one way that I've worked out about the moon, but your new moons and like old moons and whatnot like that. That's still something I'm slowly figuring out. But it's obviously it comes with time, and yeah, I'm super keen to keep working it out. Like I think we've got our first tournament in like a month's time or whatnot like that. So it's going to be an interesting season, so it should be fun.
Actually, it's probably a good time to talk about this tournament that you're participating in. So what is this tournament and where are you going to be competing shortly?
So basically, the main tournament series that I fish is the QTS, which is your Queensland Team Series. It's run by Southport Fishing Club here on the Gold Coast. It's basically once a month. I'm pretty sure there's 7 rounds this year, 8 rounds, 7 rounds plus a grand final. Um, Basically runs out of the Broadwater, which is your main system on the Gold Coast. From where it's situated in Southport, there you can go north all the way up to like your jumping pins and Jacob's Well and stuff like that, and you can go south down into the Nerang River. And I'm not sure if you ever watched any of the old like AFC series, the Australian Fishing Tournament series and whatnot like that that happened on the Gold Coast back when like Starlo and that were fishing in it. But your Nerang River is insanely big. Um,
Right.
like we get around between 20 and 30 boats per tournament, and you'll see 20 boats go south down into the Nerang, and you'll be lucky to see another boat in that whole day. Like you might see them, but it's very rare that you're sitting on top of them because of how
That's
much system
insane.
there is. Yeah, the Nerang River system, where most of the people that fish there, is huge. Like it is insanely big.
How would you describe the structure in that system? Is it a narrow river or is it like a really wide bay, you know, sort of system?
It's hard to explain because it changes so much the further you go down. So it'll start out near the Broadwater as like a fairly open kind of system, like not open as big as like you say your Harbour Bridge water area is. It's fairly tighter than that, but
Yep.
you can go from like a decent size width system down into canals that are like you're struggling to put two boats in kind of thing.
Right.
So it's a big variable system, which is why it makes it so good to fish.
And what about Broadwater itself?
Broadwater
How would you
itself,
describe that system?
the Broadwater basically it's not so much a system as more like a body of water. So your Broadwater is basically where you've got like your trawlers, which a lot of people fish as well. You've
Yep.
got like your Marina Mirage, which is like your main. It's like where Versace and stuff like that is. Like obviously it's out of bounds during a competition system, but you got it's basically where your channel is for the spit, which is where everyone goes out offshore and stuff like that as well. So your Broadwater is not like a lot of people do fish it, and it's more of like a deep water fishing. But
Yep.
yeah, if you ask any like tournament fisher, brim fisher on the coast, they're heading north or south and not really sticking in your main channel of the Broadwater. Mainly because when we're fishing these comps, it's on either on a Saturday or Sunday, and boat traffic through there is absolutely mental. So it's trying to fish it is like trying to fish like offshore, essentially in a way. You've got land yachts that are coming, like big yachts that are coming past you every couple of minutes, and yeah, it doesn't make it enjoyable to fish at all. No.
Yeah, sounds like a bit of a situation at times there.
Oh, very much so, very much so. I think I've nearly been thrown out of the boat a couple of times when you're standing there fishing a like a rock wall and you're not looking behind you, and a big boat comes past, and the wake that it puts off is dipping higher than your boat is, and yeah, you almost get thrown into the water a couple of times.
Now, when you're chasing brim, you must get quite a few bycatch, other species like you mentioned already, jacks.
Yeah, you
for
may.
example. How do you sort of like weed out, or sort of, if you know that in this area there's fish, some of it is brim and some of it is whatever else that might be out there.
So
Um,
your main, like the main bycatchers that we get, your flathead mainly. So you'll mainly get flathead on the when we're brim fishing. You get the odd trevally that come through as well.
yep,
Obviously, you can't really decipher and not catch them essentially. Um, but yeah, we've caught whiting on like divers as well, like little chubbies and stuff like that. Like they're not shy at all. But yeah, it's the systems that we go in. They're predominantly fed by brim. Like you'll get your jacks and stuff like that in there, and your flathead and whatnot. Like, but the main spots that we're going to fish, we already know that there's brim there. It's our main place to go, kind of thing.
yep.
Yeah, it's hard to decipher between like everything else because they're obviously everywhere, type of thing. But yeah, it's not an easy task trying to decipher through them, but it does get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you wouldn't be disappointed if you hooked a massive flathead,
Oh no, not at
for
all.
example.
I mean, my mate, I don't. We fish on my mate's boat. He's got a decent sized boat. He's a 529, and he has two live wells in it for a reason. So it helps
Yeah.
out.
Oh, let's talk a little bit about gear. I think I've gone through heaps of things already. Or if there's anything that you'd like to discuss, yeah, definitely let me know. But I think gear is the next easiest or next obvious point that we haven't gone through. So just real briefly,
Yeah.
how would you set up your gear for your surface and maybe
So
your hard body combos?
mainly my hard bodies are. I'm looking at like a what is it, like a 2 to 6 pound rod, something that's really flimsy. You're looking at like a 7 foot, 7 foot two, sometimes a 7 foot 6 as well. Like nice long, very soft tip. Something that's you're right. Something that's like very soft and like you can feel everything coming down through that rod. Basically,
Yep.
with crankbaits and whatnot like that. Um, I'll use the same kind of rod, but mainly a 7 foot for your top water. A little bit heavier, mainly like a 1 to 3 kilo, so it's a little bit stiffer in the tip, so it's a little bit easier to work the lure. Then when it comes to like cranker crabs and like plastics is the same type of setup. It's like a 2000 size reel, 1 to 2000 size reel, like 6 pound braid, like 0.6 pound braid, 6 pound leader, drop down to 4 pound leader if need be during the day, kind of thing.
Yep.
Same with plastics. Plastics is the same type of thing as your top water. So those kind of very versatile setups. Excuse me.
Yep.
And then when it comes to cranker crabs, you're looking at a heavier setup, like a 2500 with like my actual favorite rod to use for cranker crabs is the old school Daiwa aired rod.
Right.
It's rather flimsy, but it's got such a stiff back that I can basically rip these fish out. I run that with like a 2500 size reel, like your Daiwa reel. I'm a big Daiwa fanboy, so most of my stuff is all Daiwa. Um, but yeah, so like, and with cranker crabs, you're looking at like a 8 pound braid. I may run 6 pound braid, but it's more like an 8 pound braid, sometimes 10. So
Yep.
more like a point 0.8 than anything else, and with it anywhere from 8 to 12 pound leader, because it's more wanting to rip those fish out than lose a lure and lose a fish.
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like you have a style of fishing where you prefer soft tips, and then if you need the power, it's in the midsection and butt.
Essentially, yeah. Like my favorite rods that I use are obviously the infeats, and I've found that I've used the $189 ones, like your cheaper models, and I've used their more expensive models. And personally, I keep going back to the lower model because I just like the feel of the rod itself and in my hand. And yeah,
Yep.
it's just I like them. They're very good rods. They're probably one of your perfect brim rods that you can use.
Yeah, fun fact, I lost so anyone that's listening, I lost an in-feet rod at McMahon's Point. So if you guys winched that out from the wharf, let me know.
Oh no!
No, I'm only kidding. If you guys find it, yeah, enjoy the rod, enjoy the reel that comes with it. In my heart, it's already gone. So we parted ways. Like, it's not giving me any further pain thinking about what happened to my in-feet, Grant.
That's never a good thing. Never ever a good thing.
No, but I understand what you mean by that sort of like. It's a very like comforting sort of like forgiving action in the
Yeah,
tip.
yeah. It's something that you've gotten. you've gotten to get used to. And now that I'm so used to it, it's what I keep going back to. And it's just like, you know what the rod's going to do. You know what you've got to do a certain thing with the rod. And it's just, it almost comes naturally after using it for so long.
Any like specific brands of braid or leader that you swear by? I mean, you may not, but if you do.
So my main leader that I use it's really hard to find, but when you find it, I bulk up on it. It's your Harris Fighter. I can't remember who it's made by. I think it's Yamatoya.
It is, yep.
Could be wrong. Yeah, that's
Yamatoyo or Yamatoya. I think something like that.
I think it's Yamatoya. But yeah, Yamatoya Harris Fighter. That and the 4 and the 6 pound is my go-to. Anything 8 pound up is all FC Rock. My line, back end of last year when I think it's Samaki brought out the YGK stuff.
Yep.
The YGK Pentagon. I really like that stuff, so I'm using that in and there's another one by YGK. I can't remember what it's called, but it's in the gold packet. It's like a white colored braid.
Right.
That in a 0.6 as well. The breaking strain on that stuff is insanely good. Like it's a 0.6 braid with a 14 pound breaking strain, which is like nuts. It's very super thin, easy to cast. I've never had a wind knot with it. It ties, and I'm tying FG knots on this 0.6 to 4 pound, and it ties perfectly. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are going to hear that and be like, why are you tying FG knots? But personally, when I'm going on to a Bream tournament the night before, everything's got an FG knot. If I'm out in the boat and I have time, I'll tie an FG knot if I have to retie. But if I'm on the boat, it's normally like a double uni or something like that, but just get it done quickly. But
yeah, don't feel alone. I tie FG knots on the water as well, on the 0.6 PE, 4 pound, 6 pound liters. So
that's it. Like I personally, I never used to tie an FG. I used to always tie your double uni. And then when I started jack fishing is when I taught myself how to tie an FG. Like I watched a couple of videos like Briggsy and Froth Cafe, like Johnny Brooks, watched their videos on and basically mixed their 2 FG knots together and made one. And I started basically when I was jack fishing in almost pitch black conditions is when I started tying FG knots. So I've got my FG knots down to almost under a minute now, which is pretty handy.
That is good. Yeah. That should be some sort of, achievement.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how quick I can tie
1 minute. I mean, there are a few things that are achievements. Definitely FG under 1 minute is a big achievement.
Yeah, it's not always under a minute, but it's pretty close.
I think another one would be if you can tie the FG knot without using your mouth and every single toe and.
Well, I don't actually. My FG knot does not go in my mouth at all. It's all my fingers, basically, like standing on my line and all my fingers.
That's like me. That's good.
Yeah.
I only use my hands and the spool's somewhere else, keeping tension, and it's not in my mouth.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Because, in Sydney, a lot of our systems are quite polluted, and the last thing you want is to dip that line in the Cook's River where the three-eyed fish is, and then dip it in your mouth, and then go, that tastes funny.
Yeah, no,
and then tie your
not a fan of that at all. No, thank you.
That is so true. But yeah, definitely I want to make mention here that FG knots aren't essential for anyone that's listening and you tie the Albright. I always bag out people that tie Albrights, but there's nothing wrong with an Albright. It just doesn't agree with me. I do tie it, so I do use it. If there's a bust up in front of me, kingfish or tuna, whatever it is busting up and I pop off my leader, Albright's coming straight on. I don't like it, but Albright's the fastest knot I can tie, given 5-10 seconds to get that lure back out there. So
definitely. If you're in a place where you need to get a lure back in the water, tie whatever's easier for you. If you've got to tie 9 granny knots, tie 9 granny knots, but it's all on you.
That's right, Grant. How does that saying go? If you don't know how to tie knots,
tie lots.
Tie lots. That's right. Yeah. Tie lots. I mean, that's how I started fishing. You go fishing the first time you've never fished before. You need to join 2 bits of line or join a hook or a sinker to the end of your line. What do? You just tie granny upon granny upon granny until that's tight.
You see people tying granny knots and granny knots. It's like, mate, if that works for you, then go hard. If you want to know how to tie another knot, then I'll show you, but you do you, bud.
All right, Grant. All this talk about bream fishing is getting me G'd up. I starting to wonder how your day would start. Like, say, if you were to take us through from the night before, you're going fishing. So it's been raining for the last 29 days. The skies are finally parting way. The sun's coming out on the 30th day. You've been waiting this whole month to fish. You're finally getting your chance tomorrow. Take me through the process of what it takes and, you know, your emotions and all that from the night before till when you cast that first lure.
You're always going to be super keen. So the night before, I'll be sitting in the garage tying fresh knots. Even if I've had knots on there that I know are going to hold, I'm always tying fresh knots before any day fishing. Tying knots, lures on, everything in the car ready to go, all my gear ready to go, food packed, fridge packed. Try and get to sleep, and normally it's about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours sleep because you're too keen to get up and get fishing.
That sounds like me. Sometimes I don't even get a single minute.
Mate, nights before comp days, I reckon I get about an hour, maybe 2 hours sleep before I'm up at 5 o'clock and heading down to the ramp to go fishing. But yeah, 90% of the time it's going to be a good day, and you're going to have those off days. But any day out on the water is better than a day at home, is what I say. But fishing's fishing. You can go out there and get busted off 35 times and lose $300 worth of lures, or you can go out there and use one lure all day and bang 40,000 fish. So all depends on how you feel about it and how you want to look at the outlook.
Yeah, actually, I've had that happen before. That atomic diver has
Yep.
been that one lure that's done all the damage.
I have one of those atomic divers in my box that I reckon is almost crystal clear because it has no paint left on it.
Wow. I was getting to that stage, Grant, let me tell you, until I lost it in a tree, and I've been spewing ever since.
I did that with a bent minnow. I bought a bent minnow. The actual first bent minnow I ever bought cost me $37, and I went down to one of the local little spots that we have here. First cast, I put it across the river into a tree and snapped off, and that's probably still there to this day.
Oh, Grant, look, thank you very much for coming on this podcast. Gonna wrap it up here. I think the viewers are definitely gonna like listening and watching to this one. Now, how can people get in touch with you? And are there any people or sponsors that you'd like to mention that have contributed, you know, to your journey, your fishing success?
Mainly, you've got my Instagram, Redbeardsxadventures. You got my YouTube, which is Redbeardsxadventures also. And I just want to say thanks to Sporties. They're not actually a sponsor, but they support me whenever I need to. And also Gangster Lures, who jumped on board not long ago. They've been setting us up with clothing and whatnot like that. So yeah, it's been going good. So basically, thanks to them. Tony at Sporties, obviously, my Bream tournament partner Steve as well. Like, we only met a year and a half ago, and we've been going pretty good, and we're looking forward to another very good season this year.
Awesome, Grant. All right, ladies and gents, gonna wrap up the podcast here. That was Grant Painter, Redbeardsxadventures. Now, this is for the Shroom Life podcast, and if you want to come on, or you know someone that needs to come on and talk fishing about any species, you know, Australia-wide, tell them to contact me. Love to have them on, because I think if you guys are enjoying this podcast, I'm going to keep this going. And yeah, that's it from me. This is the Shroom, signing out.